Dominik Skoczek, Managing Director of SAA in Poland, to give his thoughts. Thank you, Dominik.
Thank you, Barbara, and good morning, everybody. I'm representing SAA, a Polish CMO for audiovisual authors and producers, and I'm pleased to present some national experience to further justify from a practical point of view what have been already said by Professor Dusselier and Professor Ksala-Barder. As an example, I take the Polish case, of course, but what I want to say is often also true from the other countries, especially from the Central and Eastern Europe region. The market practice in the film industry in Poland is to sign so-called buyout contracts. Authors have transferred all their exclusive rights to the producer upfront for a single fee, and such contracts cover 80 to 90% of the film production agreements. And such practice is not a new one. It is in fact older than emergence of the streaming services like Netflix. And such a practice is additionally legally empowered in Poland by the legal provision of the presumption of transfer of rights by the producer. And of course, these are not satisfactory solutions for the authors, but in exchange for that, the law provides for a statutory right to remuneration for audiovisual authors, which by law in Poland may not be waived, transferred, or executed. The co-authors of the audiovisual work are entitled to this additional remuneration. And what is maybe unique, it is not only directors and screenwriters, as in many other countries, which have similar legislation, but also directors of photography, set designers, costume designers, film editors, and even few others. And the collection of the remuneration is entrusted by law to the collective management organization. In theory, everything looks fine, and it's in fact what we wanted to achieve with Article 18. So the actual users, the end distributors, broadcasters, cable operators, cinemas, DVD distributors, have been obliged to pay statutory royalties for almost every kind of exploitation of movies, but not for online exploitation. I'll come back to that later. But in practice, there are constant problems with enforcement. Only a few entities were willing to conclude contracts with CMOs and clear their status voluntarily. Most of them refused to pay, lowered the basis used for calculation of the appropriate rate applied by SAA, or refused to provide necessary information. And this leads us to long-standing court proceedings and long-term negotiation. Finally, we were succeeded, but I can only imagine what would happen if we didn't have the proper regulation in our Copyright Act. If we didn't have the statutory rights to remuneration provided by law, it will be practically impossible to collect any remuneration for authors other than for the creation of the work. And in many countries of the region, we see how difficult it is to enforce any remuneration for the further exploitation of the movies. One single payment upfront, and that's all what authors can receive. So the best solution for countries like Poland is to provide by law the unwaivable right to remuneration. This is the solution. This is the best way to ensure a fair share of revenues for audiovisual authors. And such a concept as already Raquel said, weights the economic interests of the producer, authors of the audiovisual work, and users. The producers have all exclusive rights in their hands and are free to decide on distribution. The authors get the royalties at almost every mode of exploitation of the movies. And finally, users can pay an additional remuneration, but only in proportion to the actual revenues generated by the movie. So if the movie is not successful, they do not pay anything extra to authors. If the movie is popular, they generate some additional revenue for themselves, and a small part of them they could grant to authors via collective management organizations. As I said before, the present Polish legislation have, however, one major gap. We lack a similar regulation in relation to the digital exploitation. I have in mind mainly VOD exploitation and activity of the streaming services, and the implementation of Article 18 of the DSM directive. We found it as the opportunity for us to fill such a gap and introduce a right to remuneration for authors, also for the online users. Thanks. I will stop here.
Thank you very much, Dominik. And I think that's a picture that a lot of CMOs can fully recognise is unless something is enshrined in law, it's quite often very difficult to enforce. So thank you for that view, for recommending that the solution is an unwaivable right to remuneration, which is fair to all parties, and that there is currently an opportunity to be able to do something about this in the different member states as they look to implement their own interpretation of Article 18.